Okay, folks, I'm just gonna throw this disclaimer in here right at the beginning. Few topics get me heated, and I am on fire today. Get ready, folks. It's an all-new Prove It To Me. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prove It To Me. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Law. If I was indeed on a consistent release schedule at this point, you could argue that this episode is a week late. I have to be honest, I started writing this a month ago, and I had to walk away from it for a bit. This was a tough one for me to get through. This is about as controversial as I have dared to get so far. I'm going to create division. You are either going to love what I have to say, or you will hate me with every fiber of your being. At the end of this episode, you will either be a forever follower of the podcast, or you are going to block me on all platforms. I might even face some retaliation from the authors of the study I'm about to critique. That's okay. I'm ready for it. I probably deserve it. In the end, I came back to finish this episode and get it released just because I personally feel it's important that we look at these things thoroughly so we don't find ourselves moving in the wrong direction as researchers and as environmental health and safety professionals. So let's get into it. I want to start today by saying that I am not a philosopher, especially when it comes to workplace safety. There are self-proclaimed safety philosophers, including my buddy Professor Wyatt Bradbury. Seriously, it's in his LinkedIn profile headline. I can tell you that's not me. Now, I'm not going to rag on philosophy. There's a place for it. I'll even say there's a need for it. Occasionally, if you get a few bourbons in me, I'll even dabble in it. I might even say some things that sound super highly educated and thought-provoking. So ahead of you finding yourself in a situation with me when I start engaging in philosophical discussions, I'm going to tell you that in that situation, I am probably not actually correct, even if I sound correct. And it's probably time for me to go to bed. Just send me to bed. Professionally, for me, I do not have time for philosophy. I'm a quantitative guy. I spend my time in data. My time is consumed with measuring concepts with tangible numbers that help me analyze relationships between real variables. I don't have the desire to make time for philosophy. My perspective, right, wrong, or indifferent, is that the occupational safety and health profession is flooded with philosophy. Everywhere you turn, it seems somebody has a big idea that challenges the way we do things. And honestly, that's great. Our workers are still getting hurt, we are still experiencing massive losses, and we are still seeing environmental disasters. We should be challenging the way we do things. So often, though, these big ideas are founded in little more than petty contrarianism rather than replicable evidence. My favorite things are when we rename key concepts in the name of innovation with absolutely no data to prove that renaming something will actually change any kind of outcome. Have you ever heard someone argue about whether to call it a near miss or a near hit? Nothing makes my blood boil more than this absolutely useless, unfounded argument. Near miss, near hit, who really gives a shit? The problem isn't the name. The problem is that you aren't capturing the data you need to make any kind of difference in your outcomes. When you fix that, then you can come talk to me about what you want to call it. In fact, folks, you should know by now that part of the whole reason for this podcast is to challenge these big philosophical ideas by highlighting the real data and evidence that we get from good research. You could say that there is no room for philosophy in this podcast because we're too busy talking about the real stuff, not theory or rhetoric. It might even sound insane to you at this point that I would even broach the topic of philosophy on a podcast that claims to bring you real research, real data, and no bullshit. Nevertheless, I have to tell you that today's study finds got me particularly heated because in its design, it directly conflicts with a core philosophy that I totally buy into. I am letting you know this at the beginning because this philosophical concept that I buy into does create bias in how I will critique this study. I'm going to eviscerate the construction of this study from beginning to end with malice and forethought, simply because its intent and its design is so contradictory to my firmly held beliefs and how I approach workplace safety. And I am genuinely worried about the perceptions that this study may create should it be acquired and adopted by the general population. I could be wrong, but I really don't think I'm wrong. And therein lies my bias. So here's what I want to do. I want to go over the summary of the summary. Then I want to explain to you the root of my bias. And then, if you're still with me after I get unreasonably tangential about my deeply held beliefs, then you can follow along with me as I rip apart this study limb from limb. If you're a subscriber to the Professional Safety Journal, you may be familiar with the fact that they have several different types of articles every month. There are usually a handful of peer-reviewed articles, but then there are also updates about the American Society of Safety Professionals, brief synopses about OSHA initiatives and standards updates, and some news that the editors pull from other locations. Today's study finds comes from the Safety Matters section of PSJ's January 2025 issue. The headline reads, "Study explores complacency during workplace fire evacuations." In a few short paragraphs, the editors summarized the study, which explored occupant complacency during evacuations and suggested that the strong management support for fire safety, the integration of a fire safety culture, and having trained fire wardens can help prevent occupant complacency. All good stuff, right? So maybe you're thinking, what the hell is your problem, Dr. Law? What beef could you possibly have with this study? There's this word that makes me want to vomit every time I see it. It is a word that I feel is inherently drenched in everything that is wrong with what some may consider as the traditional approach to safety. To me, it's a vile word. The word is complacency. I mentioned my buddy Wyatt earlier, and he shared with me his thoughts and work on this, as well as conversations he had with Ron Gant and Ivan Pupility. All three of these guys are highly intelligent, and I hold them in high regard. I don't want to misconstrue any of what I'm about to say as direct quotation from any of them. But my thoughts here are inspired by them, as well as my own experience over the years working in occupational safety and health. Complacency is a word that is overused and abused in our profession. It is a word that you'll find in the conclusion section of incident investigation reports prepared by what I would consider less mature workplace safety programs. It is a term that inevitably blames the victim of a workplace incident for the situation in which they and they alone are accused of placing themselves. The word complacency is a scapegoat, and it blinds observers and investigators from organizational, situational, environmental, and systemic factors that almost always should be considered as the root cause or part of the collection of root causes that cause incidents that negatively impact people, property, and the environment. You see, complacency as we know it is something that is natural and can be expected. In fact, we do expect it to happen. The Dreyfus mental model for skill acquisition walks through the stages of developing any type of skill, from novice to competence to proficiency to expertise and finally, mastery. If I'm oversimplifying this, I apologize, but it's for good reason. But at every advanced stage of skill acquisition or development, less mental power is needed for the basics. As you spend less mental or cognitive power on the basics, you have room for more complicated tasks, more technical parts of the skill, even reaching mastery, where the basics naturally happen without any active dedication of mental power. Put another way, complacency is kind of the goal here. Yes, we're in theory here. Maybe sometime I can look to find some quantitative data from brain scans during skill development to see if this has been proven out. For now, it's a well-accepted theory that has persisted for more than 4 decades. Now, Wyatt gave me an example that makes a lot of sense to me. Think about your daily commute. The first time you took that commute, you were probably super focused on where you were driving, how you were driving, and all the little details along the way. You might have turned the radio down at a complicated intersection or as you pulled into the parking lot to conserve cognitive power. Yes, that's why you do it. As the days, weeks, months, and years went on, and you've made that same commute, you probably don't think as much about it anymore. You may have had days where you've made that commute, and at the end, you don't remember any of the details about the commute itself unless you came across something really different or jarring, like you got pulled over, or you swerved around some roadkill, or you had to stop for a bus that's not normally on your route. Over time, you have become complacent to the basic details of your commute. Is it wrong? No. It's natural and it's expected. We expect this from our workers too. We expect them to get more efficient and better at their jobs as they master the skills it takes to accomplish them. It is natural on their first day to be highly aware of every little detail as they learn what the hell they're supposed to be doing. Over time, they may learn to naturally ignore the things that have never hurt them before, to walk the path they've always walked, because those were basics from day one. Mental power is needed elsewhere to continue to master the work. So, why then, if this is natural and expected, should we ever blame them when a new situation is introduced outside of their control that disrupts the routine and they just happen to be caught in the middle of it because we expected them to be masters of their work? Why are we aiming to try to fix complacency when we should be fixing the system around the worker to ensure they can continue to be masters of their work in a safe manner? Why would we ask the worker to rob themselves of the mental power required to be efficient at their jobs just because we couldn't fix the organizational, situational, environmental, and systemic factors around them that are the true causes of the incidents? All I'm saying is if your root cause that you found is complacency, you're not digging deep enough. If you're trying to fix complacency, you're trying to fix something that cannot be fixed. And honestly, I hope it's obvious, we don't want to fix that. Therein lies my bias approaching this study. If you're still with me, and I hope you are, just know that I'm going to be critiquing this article with extra scrutiny because I already disagree with the apparent intent. And I realize all of this gets me close to that realm of being a pundit with an opinion, but I really feel very strongly about this. So here we go. Let's dig in. This article is open access, so when I include the link in the episode notes, you will be able to click it, read the whole thing, download the PDF, whatever you want to do without any special credentials. The article is titled Occupant Complacency in Workplace Fire Evacuations and published back in September 2024 in Humanities and Social Sciences Communications. To start, I can tell you the authors declared no competing interests and they did not receive any financial contributions for performing the research or writing the article. So what really is the intent of this study? From the abstract, quote, this study addresses the hypothesis that if there is a clear definition of occupant complacency during workplace fire evacuations and control measures are developed, tested, and implemented, the risks of injury and death related to occupant complacency during workplace fire evacuations could be prevented or mitigated, end quote. I mean, that's not really how you construct a hypothesis, but okay. So the association we're looking for is between what? Having a clear definition of complacency as the independent variable and the ability to implement effective controls as the dependent variable? Ugh, okay. So normally when you construct a hypothesis for quantitative research, it is the positive response to the research question that goes something like this. Is there an association between X and Y? The hypothesis then goes, there is an association between X and Y. Or a different research question, what is the relationship between X and Y when controlling for Z? The hypothesis then is that there is a relationship between X and Y when controlling for Z. You'll also see a null hypothesis, which basically states that there is no significant relationship between X and Y. If there is an association, the correct way to state this is that the study rejects the null hypothesis. Or if there is not an association, you say the study failed to reject the null hypothesis. The reason for saying it this way is that without evidence to the contrary, the null hypothesis is always true, meaning there is no relationship between variables unless we have the data to prove it. Again, moving into the introduction section of the article, the authors state the paper will address the hypothesis that, quote, if occupant complacency during workplace fire evacuations is adequately defined and adequate control measures are developed and implemented, the risk of death or injury during fire evacuations can be prevented or mitigated. End quote. By wording the hypothesis in this way, absent of a research question to guide the hypothesis and null hypothesis, the authors are already assuming that there is a relationship, which arguably could create bias in the construction of the study. If you want a relationship to be there, if you assume the relationship is already there, you can absolutely construct your experiment to prove that the relationship is there, whether it factually is or not. It's a dangerous pitfall in research. It removes the objectivity. Believe it or not, a well-constructed study that proves a relationship between variables does not exist is just as valuable as proving a relationship does exist. You could look at it as a long, drawn-out form of process of elimination. Let's move into the research questions because the authors do state them, but only after stating their singular hypothesis, which is weird. The research questions should be the main questions that drive the design of the study, the measurement instruments, the sampling, really everything. First research question: is there a clear and adequate definition of occupant complacency during workplace fire evacuations? Yeah. So no variables or relationships there, just a yes or no question, apparently. We're just rooting around to define a problem that we're absolutely sure exists, but we don't know what words to put to it. Fine. Second research question: are workers, upon receiving an alarm, complacent in their decision and behavior to immediately begin movement towards a safe location as described in previous literature? Oh, that's cool. That makes me think we're going to observe fire drills and measure the percentages of people in the building that comply with the alarm and how quickly they do so. That's promising. Let's move on. Third research question: what are the behaviors and conditions that are antecedents to occupant complacency during workplace fire evacuations? I gotta be honest, folks. I don't know what the hell we're doing here. Is this qualitative and not quantitative research now? Is it mixed methods? I did a quick search for those terms in the document. They don't exist in terms of describing the study. Also, now you're looking to find the precursors to complacency, but as indicated by the first research question, you may not even have a definition for complacency. Are we still constructing the definition with this question? Okay, finally, the fourth research question: what are the strategies to prevent occupant complacency during workplace fire evacuations? I'm not even gonna, moving on. So it looks like the authors created a survey based on these research questions, along with a review, statistical analysis, and evaluation of data that originally came from the Fire Risk Management Group report from the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health in 2023. I'm not going to go through the entire introduction here. The rest of this is basically the literature review that allows the authors to set up the problem. Some of this is about the fact that fires kill people. I mean, no one's going to deny that here. But it is important to restate these occurrences to show that we are trying to fix a real problem. It also turns out that there are quite a few previous articles that seek to define complacency and relate it to other factors, such as risk perceptions. Risk perceptions I can get behind. These are quantifiable. If you don't believe me, go read my doctoral research, which you can find at drmattlaw.com. There is one paragraph here that goes through a bunch of different definitions, including Merriam-Webster's 1999 Collegiate Dictionary, which states complacency is, quote, self-satisfaction, especially when accompanied by unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies. Another article they found claimed that complacency should be framed as risk perception and risk tolerance, given that the underlying psychological mechanisms of these concepts are better understood and that the link between perceived risks and accidents is established. Great! Why didn't we just go with that? Nope, we want to attack complacency still. Anyway, moving on to materials and methods, the authors created an 8-question survey based on work conducted by Lipinski in 2021. Lipinski, by the way, suggested that complacency occurs when, quote, the employee is not taking risks seriously and takes for granted that an accident won't happen to them. The survey was distributed to a convenient sample of occupational safety and health and fire safety professionals through the web, LinkedIn, and through international OSHA and fire safety related instructions. Okay, stop. It all just fell apart for me. This is probably the absolute worst thing you could possibly do with this study. Safety professionals? We're not even observing actual behaviors or testing controls and interventions. We're asking safety professionals about complacency. You want to talk about response bias? God bless safety professionals. I'm one of them, but there's a reason I just had a tangent about complacency. It's because even safety professionals don't get this right. I don't know how many videos of unsafe situations I've seen on LinkedIn. Scroll down to the comments section, and sure enough, there's a bunch of so called safety professionals talking about how stupid the guy was that just got hurt. These are the people you want to ask about complacency? The safety profession as a whole hasn't even come to a consensus on the right way to do safety. We've got safety one and safety two and BBS and HOP and SIFs and arguments about the statistical validity of TRIR and debates over technical standards and all sorts of other bullshit that we can't agree on. If we actually figured out the right way to do safety, we might actually start moving the needle on serious injuries and fatalities. Look, I get it. The safety profession is relatively young. We've got maybe a century of practice under our belts. We've got only half of that with any kind of regulatory standard in the US. Compared to medical, legal, and engineering professions that have been around for thousands of years, it makes sense that we haven't quite cracked the code yet to start making real advances. But now, just by handing this survey about complacency over to a bunch of safety professionals, not only are they going to tell you about their views of complacency, but you're pointing them in the wrong direction from the start. Of course, they're going to tell you that their workers are complacent. Of course, they're going to give you exactly what they want to hear with your results. They're the ones dealing with this stuff every single day. They see the worst of it. They're jaded about it because they haven't figured out how to fix this problem that can't actually be fixed. They're trying to fix the wrong things, and you're pushing them further towards that. Folks, I think I need a co-host. I need someone to balance me out when my blood starts boiling like this. I'm about to turn into Rush Limbaugh or something. This is ridiculous. I don't even want to finish reading through this study at this point, but I'm going to. Just let me calm down for a second. All right. I finally got to the section where they list their variables and analyses. The first thing they want to do is identify the antecedents to occupant complacency to try to figure out a definition that works. The respondents were given some options, but also allowed to provide their own answers in a free text box. The next part that actually required statistical analysis examined relationships between variables. Independent variables included industry, country, and whether their role had fire safety responsibilities, and dependent variables included their success in strategies to avoid occupant complacency and whether complacency plays a role in delaying evacuation. So what did they find? This is actually the section that gets a little complicated to sort out if you're not careful. There's the 8-question survey that went out to a convenient sample of safety professionals, and then there's the FRMG report dataset, and then there's the literature review. So, as far as the definition of occupant complacency goes, the authors solved that one themselves using the literature review. The definition is, quote, a delay in pre-movement time between the time an evacuation alarm is activated and when movement is started, end quote. And that's what they included in the survey to guide the question about the antecedents or precursors to complacency. I'm actually a little confused by that. A delay in pre-movement time? Is that really complacency? To me, that seems more like hesitation or non-compliance and doesn't really capture those elements of self-satisfaction or ignoring the hazards or anything about risk perceptions or risk tolerance. Whatever, I guess we're rolling with it. I mean, maybe I got mad for no reason. Maybe we're just tagging this stupid complacency word onto something that really isn't what is traditionally known as complacency, and we're really getting into something else entirely. The problem is, even with this definition, we're still in human error as the main focus. And humans do human things, always. Good luck trying to fix it. I actually want to run through the question about antecedents to this complacency that they've supposedly defined now. The respondents were given 4 options to choose from, or they could pick other and type in their own response. So, using the definition, a delay in pre-movement time between the time an evacuation alarm is activated and when movement is started, what are the driving conditions? Option 1, occupants ensure that others evacuate at the same time rather than follow procedures. 45 respondents used that answer. Option 2, occupants feel the building is safe and do not feel the need to move. 35 respondents picked that one. Option 3, occupants do not feel the risk is high enough to warrant evacuation. 54 respondents picked that answer. Option 4, occupants are apathetic. Ugh, gross word. 35 respondents used that one. Now, they grouped the other responses when respondents provided their own answers into 4 categories. Those were 1, ignore alarms/cues to act. That's 7 respondents. 2, inadequate training or awareness. 2 respondents. 3, lack of knowledge regarding procedures. 4 respondents there. And 4, false alarm or drill. 5 respondents. The authors said they also got a few positive responses, like no issues here. People tend to evacuate immediately. Our folks follow procedures, etc. Respondents were asked on a scale of 1 to 10 how often this complacency thing plays a role in evacuations. The mean score was 4.42. By industry, education/public services and fire services responders had the lowest score, which I guess is the best score, of 3.95. And construction had the highest score of 4.90, but there was no significant relationship between industry and the effect of complacency on evacuation. Then they were asked on a scale of 1 to 10 how successful they are in implementing strategies to avoid evacuation complacency. The mean score here was 6.36, with the highest score, which is now the best score, of 7.80 for oil, gas, chemicals, and mining, and the lowest score of 5.76 for construction. Finally, there was a free text answer to list up to 3 specific strategies to avoid complacency. Want to guess what the top one was? I'll give you a minute. What's the top answer to fix any safety incident ever in the history of mankind? You might find yourself aligning with 43.34% of responses here, with the top strategy being, wait for it, training, education, awareness raising, and communications. Wow. Imagine that. You want to fix human error? Train them. They messed up? Train them again. Keep on training till the cows come home. All right, what else do we have here? Evacuation drills at 20.96%. Evacuation plans, procedures, and maps at 11.61%. Fire wardens at 7.65%. And management role and policy tied with enforcement and disciplinary procedures at 4.53%. If you're following along, this is all in Table 5 of the study article. To no surprise, certainly not surprising to me, very few of these respondents prioritized testing the fire alarm system, limiting nuisance alarms, or housekeeping. You know, all of those things that are systemic, controllable, and have greater impacts to controlling human error? Nah, not a priority. So then this study gets into the FRMG data. And I think this is where I've been confused the whole time. Again, this study has several different elements to it to try to answer all of their research questions and address their hypotheses. Let me try to straighten this out now while we have a minute. We had a literature review so the authors could define complacency. That literature review also included the FRMG report, which again stands for the Fire Risk Management Group of the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health. Then we had this survey created by the study authors that went out to a convenient sample of safety and fire risk management professionals to gather information on the antecedents or precursors to complacency. Then finally, they dug into the FRMG data to try to find additional significant relationships there. And this data supposedly includes responses from all types of folks, not just safety and fire risk management professionals. I get the motivation for doing it this way, but the problem is that you can't make this any clearer than a pile of mud. It's a mess. You can't mix different data sets for analysis. They didn't do that, but they're bringing in all of these different sources of information to try to answer questions within one study. It's just messy, and I don't like it. I'm sorry. So they did a whole bunch of tests here, but I'm going to focus on the significant findings. First, they found a statistically significant relationship between the number of hours of emergency evacuation training over a 3-year period and the perception of concern and commitment of the company manager about fire drills. So more training equals I feel that my manager is committed to fire safety. Okay. Second, a statistically significant relationship between industry and the amount of evacuation training. Energy, engineering, and waste management had the least amount of training, and chemicals, oil, and gas had the most amount of training. Third, a statistically significant relationship between how respondents rated fire safety on their worksite and how many hours they spend in evacuation training. More hours equals I think my worksite is safe. Finally, older respondents are more likely to evacuate on the first cue based on self reported outcomes. Now, I don't normally get into the specifics of statistics here, but something stuck out to me. I don't have the data set in front of me, obviously, but the authors state that they used ANOVA tests. ANOVA stands for Analysis of Variance, and there are different types of ANOVAs, and are usually one of the more simple but solid ways to test correlation when you have quantitative variables. However, a lot of these tests have categorical variables, like industry or country, where there's no particular order to them. For these types of variables, especially if they're the independent variables, you should be using a regression test, like multiple linear regression or multiple logistic regression. And you'll probably see an ANCOVA in there, analysis of covariance, not an ANOVA. The statisticians can argue with me on this if needed. I like to think I know my correlation tests, but I have been wrong before. Then we get to this validation section. This is the section that actually made me simultaneously facepalm and laugh out loud. I'm sorry, it did, but I have to explain why. Do you remember the definitions of reliability and validity that I provided in the first episode? If not, let me explain those very quickly. Validity is the degree to which a study accurately measures what it sets out to measure. Reliability, on the other hand, is the extent to which a study consistently yields the same results when repeated. You're going to hear me use the word instrument here. When I say instrument, I'm talking about the thing that is used to measure. In this case, we're talking about the survey. Every instrument used in research should be tested for both validity and reliability. That's how we know we are getting the results we set out to measure, and those results are less likely to be influenced by other factors such as various forms of biases and confounding factors. Think of it like tuning a guitar or timing an engine or setting your watch. If you don't do these things, your outcomes are off. Your guitar plays the wrong notes, your engine misfires, and you're 15 minutes late for the important meeting. Making sure a research instrument is valid and reliable is crucial to good research. So, especially when you use a quantitative instrument, something that gives you a score or a number as a measurement, there are quantitative tests you can use for both validity and reliability. Let me share a few of these and stick with me because this is important. First, there's convergent validity. Convergent validity tells you how closely two tests that measure the same thing are related. Let's say one test is a survey where someone tells you how sad they are, and the other test is I observe how sad they are by watching them. I do that multiple times with multiple people, and if I have a statistically significant correlation between the scores of the two different tests, then I have strong convergent validity. You can even do this within the same instrument if you have two data points that measure the same thing. Have you ever taken one of those personality tests where you seemingly get asked the same question multiple times? That can give us convergent validity within the same instrument. Okay, second, there is discriminant validity. You can think of this as an opposite to convergent validity. Discriminant validity tells you whether two tests that should not be highly related to each other are indeed not related to each other when measured. For example, if I gather two different data points, let's say on a survey I ask for favorite color as one data point, and for the other I ask if they ate breakfast this morning, there should not be a strong correlation between those two things. If my test says there is not, then I have good discriminant validity. Lastly, for validity, you have criterion validity, also called criterion-related validity. This is where you determine whether your test is measuring what it's supposed to measure based on some kind of gold standard. So let's say I'm trying to determine if college entrance exams predict future academic performance. I can use GPA as the gold standard for measuring academic performance. If there's a correlation, then I have criterion validity. Another example is if I have a widely accepted survey that measures eating habits, and I shorten that survey by 50% and it still gives me the same result, I have criterion validity because the original survey was the gold standard. All of these are quantifiable. You use statistical tests to measure them. If you develop a new survey instrument, it is best to pilot it and test it for validity and reliability, which is also quantifiable, before you use it widely. In fact, many institutions won't let you do research for them unless you use instruments that have been validated. So, back to the study. Ready for this? Quote, a qualitative approach to minimize the effects of construct, content, and criterion validity was undertaken for both the survey and FRMG. End quote. The authors claim to have designed out construct validity through, quote, consultation. They used fire safety professionals to critique and influence questions. They discussed the findings with fire safety professionals to confirm the findings were consistent with expectation. Are you freaking kidding me? Let me give you a comparison to what just happened. I'm a mechanic, and I'm putting wheels back on a car. The lug nuts on a wheel have to be tightened to a specific measurement of torque so that you don't break the bolts, but also that your wheels don't go flying off on the interstate. I have seen that happen before. Now, I don't have a torque wrench on hand to measure this, but I see Jimmy over there in the corner, and Jimmy's been fixing cars for 30 years. So I say, Jimmy, do these lug nuts seem tight enough to you? Jimmy comes over, turns the wrench a bit, says, yeah, buddy, I reckon that's good. That is the validation process used for this survey. Look, at least they were honest about it, and in some circles, that might fly. But I swear, if any of you out there ever find yourself under my supervision or consultation on a quantitative study, you better never try that stuff on me. I want to be done with this. I've kept you all subject to my tirade for too long. The authors basically conclude that in order to combat this complacency that they have so courteously defined for us, you probably need a strong fire safety culture, which includes engaged leaders and workers. You need procedures put into place, and you need periodic training. For limitations, the authors discuss that future research should reach a broader audience, which includes more industries, geographic regions, language groups, and people other than safety and fire risk management professionals. They also have a paragraph in the limitations section asking for authorities to develop legislation around evacuations, which seems like the wrong place to put this, but whatever. At this point, you either get what I'm saying and you might agree with me, or you hate the way I've evaluated this and you totally disagree with me. Either way is fine. Personally, I did not like this study, and I think it sets a poor precedent. At face value, the intent is admirable. We want to keep people from getting seriously hurt or killed if or when a fire was to occur. I won't dispute that. I do think this study aims to fix the wrong problem, and based on what I just read, I don't think it even executed that very well. If we want to look at behaviors, I think we need to observe actual behaviors, not ask safety professionals to report on behaviors. If we do observe behaviors, we need to not blame humans for doing human things. We need to put the organizational, situational, environmental, and systemic controls into place that effectively prevent human error. And whether you agree or disagree with me, I would love to hear from you. Send me a note at contact@proveitpod.com, leave a review on your podcasting app, or find me on social media. Tell me I'm a buffoon. Expect me to provide more data to argue the case that I'm not, but feel free to try your case. Until next time, I'm Dr. Matt Law. This has been another episode of Study Finds on the Prove It To Me podcast. Take care and stay safe, everyone. Prove It To Me is produced by me, Matt Law. Original music by Wes London. You can find this podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Like what you've heard so far? Please like, subscribe, and follow wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Got questions about what we talked about or research that you want to share? Send an email to contact@proveitpod.com. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and its guests and do not necessarily represent the official position, opinion, or strategies of their employers or companies. Examples of research and data analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based on very limited, often single use case, and sometimes dated information. Assumptions made within this discussion about research and data analyses are not necessarily representative of the position of the host, the guests, or their employers or companies. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast. The presentation of the content by the guests does not necessarily constitute an active endorsement of the content by the host.